Joining us now is UP Professor Poli-Sci, Crisline Pilapil. Thank you so much for coming, and I'm very interested. We haven't spent any time at all talking about party lists as election results are coming in. Please tell me your view of elections now and what's at stake for us.
Well, the Philippine party list system is actually, the 2019 party list electoral system is a continuing saga of the pathological party list electoral system that the Philippines has. It will be no exaggeration for me to say that the Philippine party list system would classify as a textbook example on how not to do party list electoral system, a proportional representation-based electoral system.
Right.
Why? Because of the many institutional design flaws that are introduced from the enabling law to the interventions of the Supreme Court and even the COMELEC.
Can I ask you from the very beginning, right, for folks who don't know, what is the purpose of the party list?
Well, the original intent, the party list was introduced by the framers of the 1987 Constitution as a reform democratization measure, not to partly address the infirmities of the elite-dominated and the winner-takes-all single-member district electoral system that has marginalized smaller political parties and even civil society groups.
Correct.
So the goal of the framers of the 1987 Constitution is to give these electorally marginalized groups an alternative electoral gain that will allow them to win seats in proportion to their votes. So, and a corollary goal is to, once they have this initial head start in terms of their initial gains in elections and the achievements they had in the proportional representation electoral-based system, they're hoping that they could be encouraged to form into larger political parties such that they will be able to compete not only against traditional political parties, not only in the new PR system, proportional representation-based electoral system, but also in the old single-member district electoral system.
So it's really kind of like training wheels to build a political party.
Yes,
right?
so supposedly, it's like your toddler brother. You don't, while your brother is a toddler, you would not want him to play with bigger guys, right?
Right.
So you want to have a different ball game for him. But you don't want your toddler brother to remain a toddler for life.
Correct.
Right? And so this is the whole idea of the party list system. While you are small, you play against small parties.
Right.
But in the hope that you would eventually become bigger such that you may be able to compete against the more traditional, elite-dominated party electoral system, just like the single-member district electoral system. So
when you say it's a dysfunctional party list system, I mean, that's the word that
yes,
jumped out.
Pathological.
Yeah, pathological. Let's take a look at the results page before we go into the party list. It is now 6:34 p.m. Take a look. Let me pull this up even more so you can see it. These are the unofficial results coming in from the transparency server. Cynthia Villar is at number 1 with 51% of the votes. This is roughly a little over 0.4% of the votes to be counted. 61.8 million registered voters, right? Grace Poe is number 2. Bongo is number 3. Pia Cayetano, number 4. Bato de la Rosa, number 5. Sani Angara, number 6. Amy Marcos, number 7. Lito Lapid, number 8. Francis Tolentino, number 9. Nancy Binay at number 10. We do see Bam Aquino further down here. We'll keep going through this. Let's look at the results of the party list system and talk about that even more. Sorry, wrong. I pushed the wrong button. This is what happens when you have too many clicks. For the party list system, here's what we have so far from the unofficial results. And you can see every Filipino gets to vote for one party list,
yes,
right? Now, please tell us, out of these results, ACT, CIS, Bayan Muna, ako Bicol, Provinciano, ako Sibak. Out of this, why do you say it's pathological?
It is pathological in the sense that you have the enabling law having so many institutional design flaws. So the enabling law is Republic Act 7941. It has introduced a number of serious flaws in the institutional design. And not only that, you have the intervention by both the COMELEC and the Supreme Court the series of misguided interventions by them, such that the party list, the original intent of the party list vision, has now morphed into this bizarre electoral system that we have, wherein the key principles of proportionality had been undermined,
Right.
and the incentive is actually to make these parties even smaller and discourages the formation of larger political parties. And as we see, you now have the entry of all these political dynasties, relatives of congressmen, with military men, senators, etc., etc.
Right.
And the ultimate travesty is, of course, the entry of the presidential son claiming to be a representing the tricycle driver and the security guards.
Can we look at the party lists here, the political parties, and please tell us, give us a, you mentioned several things there. Which of these party lists are they?
Well, they are basically, if you would look at the Pulse Asia survey,
Yes.
it is to some extent consistent in terms of the 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Axies IS, okay, is a party list wherein the wife, I think, of Tulfo represents that, is a nominee, second nominee. And then, of course, you have Bayan Muna, which has been there since
Forever.
the start.
Yes.
And has been active. And then, Ako
But it
Bicol
hasn't
has
truly
also
grown,
tapped.
right? I mean,
It
Ako
has not,
Bicol, I
because
remember
as I've
this.
said, the incentive is for the parties to become smaller. Why? You have the institutional design of the RA 7941. You have a threshold. Threshold refers to the minimum number of votes needed for a party list to get a seat. But under the Carpio formula, Supreme Court, it has basically become non-existent. All countries, or almost all countries, have a threshold.
Yeah.
Why? Because it is in order to avoid the party fragmentation, precisely having so many smaller parties in the legislature. The general rule when it comes to threshold is that the higher the threshold, the greater the incentive for political parties to come together, to coalesce, to form a larger political party. Okay? And not only do we have a low threshold, which has in some ways become non-existent now because of the Carpio formula, the implication of the Carpio formula is not only to abolish the 2% threshold, but to abolish altogether the principle of threshold.
Right.
And then not only that, not only do we have a low threshold, but we also have a ceiling,
Yes.
which is unthinkable, which is crazy in a proportional representation-based electoral system. No country in the world has a ceiling. In the case of the Philippines, it is so constricting at 3 seats only. So the incentive is for parties to become smaller.
Right.
Why? For example, in the case of Bayan Muna,
Yes.
if Bayan Muna gets more than the percentage of votes needed, for example, more than 6%, if that is when they will be allotted 3 seats. So what will Bayan Muna do? In order to maximize its representation, it's going to break itself up into smaller groups. Right? So instead of just having 3 seats, by coming up with 2 party list groups, it will be able to maximize the 6 seats. Diba? So that is the problem. And then, of course, the issue of proportionality here.
Yes.
The 2% threshold has been used before as the basis for giving additional seats.
Yeah.
And because you use 2% as a basis for giving additional seats, this now results in the mathematical flaw that you will not be able to fill up the seats if there are more than 50 seats. So what happened now to the current party list system is that you have the Supreme Court, Carpio formula, that's part of the 2009 Banat et al. Versus Comelec decision, basically abolishing the threshold. It did not declare the threshold as unconstitutional, but to use the threshold for additional seats, that is what becomes unconstitutional. My response there is that, why blame the threshold, the 2%? The 2% is a threshold, so it should just be treated as a device that serves as a cutoff. It should not be used to decide or as a formula to translate votes to seats. So the main problem of the Philippine party list system, at least under RA 7941, is that you have a proportional representation-based electoral system that does not have an electoral formula.
Right.
The heart of a proportional representation-based electoral system is the formula itself,
Right.
which we do not have. And because RA 7941 did not include a formula there, this now resulted in an interpretative vacuum that allowed now the COMELEC and the Supreme Court to come up with their surrogate formulas, purportedly in order to better trash out the relationship between the different institutional features, and at the same time to better implement the intent of the framers of the 1987 Constitution, but only to end up worsening a number of these institutional features.
It's seen also as a backdoor, right? It's
Yes,
harder
it is now seen as a
backdoor.
backdoor. Whereas before, there was an attempt to pretend that you represent the marginalized sector. Now, there's no more attempt to do that. Why? Because the April 2013 Supreme Court decision has already declared or ruled that the party list is no longer exclusive for the marginalized and underrepresented sectors. It is now open to national, regional, and sectoral parties. And even in terms of sectoral representation, the Supreme Court now has two ways of understanding sectoral representation. One is to understand it in terms of marginalized and underrepresented. The other is to understand it in terms of those who lack well-defined political constituency. Whereas in the Ang Bagong Bayani 2001 decision, it said that not only must the party list groups represent the marginalized sectors, but the nominees themselves must be part of the marginalized sector. Okay? Now, under the Atong Paglaom decision, there's no need for you to be a member of there's no need for a nominee to be part of the marginalized sector. It's enough that you have a track record.
So why are we not addressing this issue?
Which one?
In
The
terms of-
everything?
Why
Yeah.
are we not fixing it?
The problem now is you have, perhaps the chance to have fixed this was before the 2009 Carpio formula, wherein you only have, out of 52 seats, 17 party list groups managed to enter,
Right.
managed to be awarded seats because of the threshold.
Yes.
Okay? Now, it would be very difficult. How could you take out all those 59 party list groups? If you would look at the listing of the results, out of, for example, last 59 party list groups that entered, perhaps only about 14 or 17 managed to cross the threshold. So meaning, if you did not cross the threshold, you should not be awarded a seat. But because of the Carpio formula, the implication of the Carpio formula, because the Carpio formula wanted to fill up all the seats, okay? Even those parties that only got 0.53% or 0.83% managed to win a seat.
Yes.
Okay? So
Yes.
that's why the incentive is this proliferation of
To keep
many small
Yes.
parties.
Yes. Professor Pilapil, can we, before we jump back into the party list, because there's so much there also, and I want to also look at the results, what's at stake for us? I mean, as a whole, 12 hours extended voting, it's the largest number of registered voters we've ever had, almost 14% more than in 2016. Our government is very different. I mean, it seems, well, I know this firsthand in a lot of ways. In your view,
In terms of the party list?
in terms of our political system.
Well, if you would look at the result, of course, to some extent, you would see the popularity of Duterte being translated to all those whom he endorsed.
Yes.
In fact, including the party list.
Including the party
Yes,
list.
this is the first time that you have a president that has openly endorsed left and right different political party
Yes.
list groups, right? Which is a contradiction
Yes.
of himself. Because if I could remember it correctly, shortly after he assumed the presidency, he talked about abolishing the party list. Why? Because it has been abused, it has been mocked at by the rich people who have been organizing themselves to join the party list. And it is also the first time now, because of the popularity of Duterte, that you have party list groups that are also openly declaring their support of Duterte. You, in fact, even have a party list named after him, Duterte Youth, running in the party. That's how crazy the political system has become. So even in terms of the senatorial candidates, as long as you get the endorsement from the president, it's as good as you have already won it.
And that really translated. I mean, we've always had a weak political party system. So I'll pull it up again, right?
Yes.
Can you go to my screen here and take a look at some of the data that we've had? Midterm exodus when political butterflies switch party alliances. We've always had particularly in the midterm, politicians jumping to whichever political party has won. But look at these party affiliations of the House of Representatives, right? From the LP, most went to PDP Laban, right?
In fact, there were only, in that you're referring to this 2016,
This
the 2016 presidential election.
From 2016 to
Yes,
for running for another post in 2019. So here, the former ruling party
Was the
that
Liberal
lost
Party.
was the Liberal Party, but in this transition to 2019, they all switched over. 77 of them went to PDP Laban, right? I mean, very interesting stuff. So this election seems to have, crumbled, imploded our political party system.
Because there is the Philippine the parties, there is really actually no party system in the sense of the real party system, which is you have to have a programmatic based political parties, disciplined political parties. We don't have that. What we have is nothing but a conglomeration of elite families versus another set of elite families. That's why if I'm going to use the term of Joma Sison, the Philippine political party is nothing but a Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola of Philippine politics. Because we don't have party system, what you have are basically individuals who are concerned not about the party itself, no ideology. They're not ideology-based. What they are interested in is their personal interests.
Yes.
So that is what
Survival.
you have. Yes, survival. That's why even if you're a close friend, for example, of this vice president, you will have to jump ship because there is no way, especially if you are a congressman,
A congressman.
a
Right,
party list,
right.
Sorry, a representative. House of
Right, House of Representatives.
Yes, because
and
you
that's
cannot have
all the entire House of Representatives is
Yes.
up. Can we go back to my screen? This is part 2 of that special report that just was published. Michael Bueza says the party switching is the perversion of the political system. And if you take a look at it again, I've been covering the Philippines for more than 30 years, and there's so many new things here. In going through this, the political dynasty, that were not mature, neither the politicians nor the voters, and essentially our political party system. Again, I've used imploded, but how do we deal with this?
Because so far, the kind of rules because in political science, we have what we call the institutional approach in political science, wherein it deals with how the design of formal political institutions influence the strategies of state and social actors. So the point here is that the kind of rules that you have influence the strategies of your actors. So in the case of the party list, for example, because the incentive is for the party list to remain small, there is no attempt to come up with an ideologically based, more disciplined parties, or even coalesce to come together to form into a larger political party. So in terms of the party system, if we want to develop our party system, the literature will tell you that the way to do that is to address your electoral system.
Correct.
So for example, in terms of candidate selection, in terms of campaign finance, what kind of ballot structure do you have? Okay? Is it open or is it closed? This would allow you to develop the electoral system.
So again,
the party system. So the party system can be developed improved through the electoral system. So it's not the form of government, it's not the system of government. Should we shift from unitary to federal? It is the electoral system because a central component or a central institution in a democracy is the electoral system.
Yes.
The kind of relationship between the executive and the legislative branch, the kind of party system, the level of accountability, transparency, governability of the political system are all intertwined, are linked to the electoral system that you have. So electoral system is indeed the most important thing.
So we have the written constitution with the checks and balances, and we have the reality of how the electoral system functions and how our government has been functioning. How healthy is our democracy?
Well, so far, if you would look at it, we thought that we have already, because we elected Noy Noy.
Yes.
Okay? So we thought that we have already imbibed democracy among us. But turns out, the fact that Duterte won and remains to be, in terms of satisfaction, it seems like people do not really understand what democracy is. If you would look
Still.
at, yes, no, democracy, it's as if that they relate democracy in terms of satisfaction with the performance
Yes.
of the government. So that is not democracy. Satisfaction with the performance is different from democracy. Because in the case of democracy, we follow the rule of law. But in the case of the president, he does not follow the rule of law. In fact, when he was running for the president, he even said that I am going to padlock Congress. And people still voted for him. No, considering that he already said. So once he gets elected, and if he decides to padlock Congress, he would tell us, did I not tell you that I'm going to padlock Congress? And you voted for me here. Okay? So that is the problem when it comes to the result of the election. Now, when it comes to the Senate, Senate is a different thing compared to the lower house because many fear that you have a Senate that is also dominated now by allies of the president.
Correct.
Yes, they may be dominated by allies of the president, but the senators remember the senators can be there in some ways for life under the 87th Constitution. The president is just there for 6 years.
6 years.
So these senators, they are going to act on the basis of their own political interests.
Right.
So they are willing to play along with Duterte when it comes to the EJK, when it comes to what else, no? Withdrawal from the ICC.
Yes.
But they're not willing to play along with Duterte when it comes to federalism. Why? Because what is it that the proposed federal constitution, or at least the PTB Lapan or even other proposals, is to have a regional Senate.
Correct.
So that means you have all these senators who may not even have a chance to win in a regional.
So you think that this, regardless of who wins in the Senate, that it would not be in their interest to pass a parliamentary form of a parliamentary system, a new constitution that would give us a new system of governance?
Most likely, yes, because in terms of their interests, it is their personal interest that will be at stake. As I've said, all the senators there could be there for life, no, under this 87 Constitution. So we're hoping, no, that even if you have new allies there would still be certain senators who would not be willing to play along with Duterte when it comes to certain aspects, especially when it comes to the shift in the system of
Are
government.
you familiar with the draft constitution that passed the House of Representatives, the one that
In
that
terms of
speaker
federal,
of what
and
it
I'm
looked
not
like?
that familiar
This is-
with it. It would have been
It was the
Jean.
Gloria Arroyo's.
Yeah.
Yes. So it was just interesting to me because I did work for more than a decade in Indonesia, which had a parliamentary system of governance, and it was essentially not a bicameral, but MPR and DPR, and it was a rubber stamp parliament.
Yeah.
Right. So it isn't the system. It's
Not the
how-
form of government.
Right.
When you speak of the form of government, it's the relationship between the executive and the legislative branch.
branches of
So,
power,
yes,
right?
no,
Checks and balances.
Yes. And then when you speak of system of government, that's the relationship between the central and local government. I also studied the forms of government debate. And literature would point out that it is not, as I've said, the form of government that would allow you to achieve many of the political virtues you want. But it is the electoral system. At the same time, it is important to work on the electoral system rather than the forms of government, because if you address or change the form of government, it's an overhaul of the institutional architecture of governance of a country, unlike the electoral system, which you could do piecemeal. For example, in the case of RA 7941, okay, the problem with the Philippine party list system. The good thing about this problem is that you don't need to have a charter change. You don't need to overhaul the
Yes.
Constitution
Yes.
to address many of the problems of the institutional flaw
Yeah.
of the party list system. Because if you would look at the Constitution, there are only 2 sentences there in the Constitution that relates to the party list as an electoral system. The first is that through a party list system of registered national, regional, and sectoral parties or organization.
Yep.
So that means the party list is not actually limited to sectoral, according to Second, is that the 20% share of the party list representatives to the overall share of the House of Representatives.
Okay.
So those are the only two sentences. Now, unless you want to change the percentage share, you don't need charter change. Okay? Unless you want to make it exclusive, no, you don't need charter change. So the problems that
agreed.
I mentioned in terms of the 2% threshold, the ceiling, these are all embedded in the 80s, in the RA 79, Republic Act 7941. So if you want to change them, it is only via mere legislation.
Right.
But of course, the problem is, even if one can come up with a good design, no, which is also difficult because you have to compare. Because when you talk about institutional design, institutional tinkering, it is about the details. The
Yes,
devil is in the
absolutely.
details.
Yeah,
Would
yeah.
it be 2% or less than 2%, etc., etc. Okay?
Yeah.
So you have to study, do comparative analysis first. It would be interesting to find out how many of them would be able to cross the 2% threshold.
So here's what we have again. So far, it hasn't moved much. It looks like, again, Abra may be the only one. AXIS, Bayan Muna, Ako Bicol, very, very small amounts.
One thing I noticed in the ballot paper, the list of party list groups are at the reverse page. So if
Yes,
the one
correct.
manning the precinct would not tell the people, they might be able not to notice that. They might overlook that, and not cast their vote for the party list
So
because it's on the reverse page.
Well, it was interesting because Nery Colmenares actually said that his pen leaked
Yeah,
through,
it leaked.
and it went into the party list, and he was worried that the machine would not count it, but
It counts.
it did.
Yeah.
Yes. So
No problem. That was also my concern because all the ink ended up on the reverse page.
I just I looked at Quezon City, so some results have been pushed in. If you take a look at this is an interesting race because last night, Bingbong Crisologo, please go to my page. Bingbong Crisologo was arrested, and so far with very few of the votes transmitted, you have Joy Belmonte leading over Bingbong Crisologo, 66% to 29%. You can go all the way down to see the lists as we go through and keep track of all of the, again, very, very early days. Where do we go from here? I think that's my, you've identified, very precisely what's wrong with the party list system. You also you made me hopeless in terms of, solutions for it.
As I've said, even if one could come up with the best design, the question is, who is going to push for that change? It should only come from the legislators. And I don't think that you will be able to convince these legislators, especially the 20% had been filled up, okay, to change the RA 7941. If there will be reforms, it should be in terms of, if you would ask me, my proposal is that the threshold should be increased. Of course, everyone would be angry because at 2% they could hardly get the vote. But that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
Because we want you to become bigger eventually, such
Right.
that you could compete against the dominant traditional political parties. But you have to take out the ceiling because, as I've said, it's crazy to have a ceiling. There's no PR system. No country that has a PR system that combined ceiling with proportional representation because it distorts proportionality. And at the same time, it allows for the perverse effect of encouraging political parties to remain smaller and
Right.
discouraging them to become bigger. But of course, even if one can do that, okay, who is going to move for that? Now, we could perhaps the prime mover, if it's not the legislative branch, you could have the executive.
Right. Well,
Or in this case, you could have the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court has always intervened in terms of its judicial power to legislate.
but it is really looking like, President Duterte has said all along he wants to change the system of governance. And this means that
But the system of government, meaning the form, from
form.
unitary to federal.
yes,
But
correct.
that's different, altogether different from the electoral system.
Yeah.
Because why would you change the system, go through this wrenching exercise of shifting from a unitary to a federal when you could do piecemeal changes? It is far easier, it is less risky. So that even if we make a mistake, we could return. Because you cannot always get it right in terms of institutional design. That's why the advice is always do it piecemeal. So in this case, we abolish first the ceiling. Let's see what happens. Hopefully, we could come up with stronger political parties.
Fantastic. We're up at the end of our hour. It's 10 minutes after 7, so it's an hour and 10 minutes after the polls have closed. If you look, though, voting is still continuing. Like if you go to our live blog page, polls are still open in Porac, Pampanga, and forever I remember Porac, Pampanga from the different disasters that it's had to deal with. But at 7 p.m., 4 among 7 polling precincts are still open at the Mitla Elementary School in Pio, Porac, Pampanga. Your last thought? I mean, again, I hear you. It sounds rational, but our politics has really been rational in the last 3 years or a little bit longer. It's always been driven by interests of the people in power.
Interest.
Yeah.
But as I've said, the kind of rules that we have could also influence the strategies of your actors. So in this case, because the rules allow that parties remain small, that's why you have this proliferation, the dizzying proliferation of small parties. Okay? So at least that is coming from an institutional design perspective. Now, I might give the wrong impression that the party list, as originally intended by the framers, is that it should be exclusively for the marginalized. Actually, in the debate, there were 2 camps that debated on the party list provision.
Yep.
The first is the pure sectoral representation,
Yep.
advocated by Commissioner Wilfredo Villacorta and Jaime Tadeo, Commissioner Tadeo. And the other camp is the pure party list representation, advocated by Commissioner Christian Monsod. So they debated, okay, and at the end, the Commissioner Villacorta agreed to enter into a compromise with the pure party list system of Commissioner Monsod. Okay? So if you would look at the proceedings of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, the winning camp was that the party list is not exclusively for the marginalized. It is for the national, regional, and sectoral parties or organization. But it was the Supreme Court, again, the misguided intervention of the Supreme Court in 2001, when the Supreme Court, in June 2001, ang Bagong Bayani decision, where it controversially stamped party list as exclusively for the marginalized. The irony is that for how many years before the 2013 reversed that decision, Supreme Court reversed, it was never followed. It was more followed in terms of the breach rather than the observance. So that's the irony there. Okay? Those marginalized will be in terms of electoral marginalization that I mentioned.
So much to deal with, and I hope we do take this into account.
Yeah, we should first understand.
I hear very little of this debate though in mainstream media, which means that it needs to get to the public as well,
Yes,
right?
because there is a misunderstanding, misconception. That's why I say it's an achievement for the term marginal, because it was never there it was not the winning position in the commission. It was not there it is not there in the 87 Constitution. That term appeared in RA 79411 once as part of Section 2, Declaration of Policy, but it was by 2001 when the Supreme Court decided to adopt it as part.
Yep.
And it happened only because it did not quote everything that Commissioner Villacorta said during that period.
Well, good. Thank you. Thank you so
also
much.
for
I learned a
having
lot in the time with you. University of the Philippines Professor Crisline Pilapil. Thank you for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much.